Sarah Martinez had always been the quiet one in her office. At 28, she worked as a data analyst for a small marketing firm in downtown Phoenix. Her colleagues knew her as the woman who always wore long sleeves, even during Arizona's scorching summers. They also knew her as someone who frequently called in sick or arrived late to work. Another doctor's appointment, her supervisor, Janet, asked with barely concealed irritation as Sarah hurried into the office at 10:30 on a Tuesday morning. Her face was pale, and she clutched her purse tightly against her chest. "Yes, I'm sorry. The specialist was running behind schedule," Sarah mumbled, avoiding eye contact as she made her way to her desk. Several co-workers exchanged glances and rolled their eyes. This was the third time this month Sarah had used the same excuse. At lunch, the office gossip mill was in full swing. "She's probably just hung over again," whispered Tom from accounting. "Did you see how shaky she was yesterday? Classic hangover symptoms. Or maybe she's job hunting," added Lisa from reception. "Who needs that many doctor appointments? She's probably interviewing somewhere else." The speculation grew more creative with each retelling. Some believed Sarah was dealing with a secret addiction. Others thought she was having an affair and using medical appointments as cover. A few of the more cynical employees suspected she was simply lazy and making up excuses to avoid work. Sarah could hear the whispers and see the pointed looks, but she said nothing. She focused on her computer screen, entering data with mechanical precision while trying to ignore the burning sensation that had started in her lower back that morning. The pain was getting worse, but she had learned to hide it well. During the weekly team meeting, Janet decided to address the elephant in the room. "I think we need to discuss punctuality and attendance," she said, her eyes fixed on Sarah. "We're a small team, and when someone isn't pulling their weight, it affects everyone." Sarah's cheeks flushed red. She wanted to explain, to tell them the truth, but the words wouldn't come. How could she make them understand something she barely understood herself? "I apologize," she said quietly. "I'll do better." Her coworker Mike, who sat across from her, let out a small laugh. "Come on, Sarah. We're not stupid. If you're going to make up excuses, at least make them believable. Nobody has this many medical issues." The room erupted in nervous laughter. Even Janet cracked a smile. "Mike's right. Look, we're all adults here. If you need time off, just ask for it honestly. Don't insult our intelligence with these elaborate stories about doctors and specialists." Sarah felt her world shrinking. The laughter echoed in her ears as she stared down at her hands, folded tightly in her lap. She noticed a small tremor in her fingers and quickly hid them under the table. "The thing is," continued Janet, warming to her theme, "we've all had real medical emergencies. Last year, when Dave broke his leg, he gave us proper documentation. When Lisa had her surgery, she planned ahead and arranged coverage. But this constant stream of mysterious appointments with no explanation, it's unprofessional." The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, with various team members sharing their thoughts on workplace honesty and responsibility. Sarah sat in silence, feeling smaller with each comment. When it finally ended, she rushed to the bathroom and locked herself in a stall. Her hands were shaking badly now, and the pain in her back had spread to her ribs. She pulled out her phone and stared at the last text message from Dr. Rodriguez. "Results are in. Please schedule follow-up ASAP. New symptoms concerning." She had been putting off that appointment for 2 weeks, afraid of what she might learn. The previous tests had been inconclusive, but the symptoms were getting harder to ignore. The fatigue, the joint pain, the strange rashes that came and went, the episodes where her vision would blur without warning. But how could she explain any of this to her colleagues? They had already made up their minds about who she was and what she was doing. In their eyes, she was either a liar, a slacker, or someone with a serious personal problem that she was too ashamed to discuss. As she sat in that bathroom stall, Sarah made a decision. She would stop trying to justify her absences. She would stop apologizing for things beyond her control. If they wanted to think she was making excuses, let them think that. At least it was easier than facing the truth that was slowly revealing itself through blood tests and medical examinations. She had no idea that within a few months, her carefully constructed facade would crumble in the most unexpected and devastating way possible. 3 weeks after the humiliating team meeting, Sarah's life took another turn for the worse. The appointment with Dr. Rodriguez had confirmed her worst fears, but she still couldn't bring herself to tell anyone at work about the diagnosis. The words felt too heavy, too real when spoken aloud. The morning started like any other. Sarah arrived at the office 15 minutes late, her usual apology ready on her lips. But instead of the expected eye rolls and whispered comments, she found the office buzzing with excitement. A new client had signed a major contract, and Janet had announced an impromptu celebration lunch at the trendy restaurant across the street. "Everyone's coming," announced Lisa, practically bouncing with enthusiasm. "Even the interns. It'll be fun." Sarah's stomach dropped. Restaurant meals were becoming increasingly difficult for her. The medications made everything taste metallic, and she often felt nauseous without warning. Plus, the restaurant Lisa mentioned was always crowded and noisy, which had started triggering severe headaches for her. "I might have to pass," Sarah said carefully. "I have some work to catch up on." The room fell silent. Janet's expression hardened. "Sarah, this is a team celebration. It's not optional. But I really need to finish the Morrison report. The report can wait," Janet cut her off. "What can't wait is your attitude toward this team. You've been distancing yourself for months, and, frankly, we're all tired of it." Mike nodded in agreement. "Yeah, it's like you think you're too good to hang out with us. First, the mysterious doctor appointments. Now you can't even join us for lunch." Sarah felt trapped. She looked around the room at the faces of her colleagues, seeing frustration and disappointment reflected back at her. These people had no idea that getting through each day was becoming a monumental effort, that the simple act of sitting upright at her desk sometimes felt like running a marathon. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'll come." The restaurant was exactly as she had feared: loud, crowded, and filled with the strong smells of garlic and spices that immediately made her feel queasy. The team pushed several tables together to accommodate everyone, and Sarah found herself squeezed between Tom and one of the new interns, an enthusiastic young man named David who spoke exclusively in exclamation points. "This place is amazing," David shouted over the noise. "Have you tried their famous spicy wings? They're supposed to be incredible." Sarah managed a weak smile and ordered the plainest item on the menu, grilled chicken with rice. Even it seemed ambitious given how her stomach was churning. The conversation flowed around her, a mixture of work gossip and weekend plans. Sarah tried to participate, but the noise was making her head pound, and the medication she had taken that morning was making her feel disconnected from everything happening around her. "Earth to Sarah." Mike's voice cut through her fog. "We're talking about the company retreat. Are you planning to actually show up for that? Or do you have another doctor's appointment?" The table erupted in laughter. Even Janet was grinning as she raised her glass. Here's to hoping Sarah's mysterious medical condition clears up by then. More laughter. Sarah forced herself to smile and raise her water glass, but inside, she felt something breaking. The retreat was next month, and she had no idea if she would even be able to work by then. The latest round of tests had shown progression, and Dr. Rodriguez had mentioned the possibility of more aggressive treatment. "Come on, Sarah, what's really going on?" pressed Lisa, leaning forward conspiratorially. "You can tell us. Are you pregnant? Is that why you're so secretive about all these doctor visits?" "Ooh, that would explain everything," squealed one of the interns. "The mysterious appointments, the weird eating habits, the mood swings." Sarah's face burned with embarrassment. "No, I'm not pregnant." "Then what is it?" Mike wasn't letting go. "Seriously, we're supposed to be a team here. If something's affecting your work, we should know about it." The pressure in Sarah's head was building to unbearable levels. The restaurant noise seemed to be getting louder, and the smell of food was making her genuinely nauseous. She could feel sweat beading on her forehead, despite the restaurant's air conditioning. "I'm dealing with some health issues," she said finally, her voice barely audible over the din. "What kind of health issues?" Janet asked, her tone skeptical. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, a wave of dizziness hit her like a physical blow. The room tilted, and she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. "Are you okay?" David asked, his voice suddenly concerned instead of excited. "I'm fine," Sarah whispered, but she clearly wasn't. Her face had gone completely white, and her hands were trembling visibly. "Maybe you should go home," suggested Tom, though his tone suggested he thought she was being dramatic. "No, I'm okay," Sarah insisted, but even as she spoke, another wave of dizziness crashed over her. This one was stronger, accompanied by a sharp pain in her chest that made her gasp. The table had gone quiet now, everyone staring at her with a mixture of concern and suspicion. Sarah knew they thought she was putting on a show, creating another excuse to leave early. The thought made her angry, and she forced herself to sit up straighter. "See, I'm fine," she said, reaching for her water glass. But she wasn't fine. As her hand closed around the glass, her vision blurred completely, and the last thing she heard before everything went black was Mike's voice saying, "Oh, come on. This is ridiculous." Sarah came to in the restaurant bathroom, lying on the cold tile floor with Lisa hovering over her, looking genuinely frightened. The earlier skepticism had vanished from her colleague's face, replaced by real concern. "Don't move," Lisa said quickly. Tom called 911. "The paramedics are on their way." "No." Sarah struggled to sit up, panic flooding through her. "No ambulance. I'm fine. I just need a minute." But she wasn't fine, and even she couldn't pretend otherwise anymore. Her shirt was soaked with sweat, and she could feel her heart racing irregularly in her chest. The sharp pain had spread from her chest down her left arm, and her vision kept going in and out of focus. "Sarah, you collapsed completely," Lisa said firmly. "You were unconscious for almost 3 minutes. Something is really wrong." Through the bathroom door, Sarah could hear the concerned murmur of voices from their table. She imagined her co-workers discussing what they had just witnessed, probably still convinced it was all an elaborate performance. The paramedics arrived within minutes, their calm professionalism a stark contrast to the chaos Sarah felt inside. They checked her vital signs, asked questions about her medical history, and insisted on taking her to the hospital despite her protests. "We need to rule out cardiac issues," the lead paramedic explained. "Your heart rate is irregular, and given your symptoms, we can't take any chances." As they wheeled her out of the restaurant on a stretcher, Sarah saw her entire team gathered near their table, watching with expressions ranging from worry to barely concealed irritation. Janet was checking her watch, probably calculating how much work time was being lost to Sarah's drama. At the hospital, the emergency room doctor took one look at Sarah's medical file and immediately called for additional tests. Dr. Rodriguez arrived within an hour, his usually calm demeanor replaced by urgent concern. "Sarah, why didn't you call me when the symptoms got worse?" he asked, reviewing the paramedic's notes. "The chest pain and irregular heartbeat are exactly what we were worried about." For the first time in months, Sarah felt safe enough to tell the complete truth. "I couldn't miss any more work. They already think I'm making everything up. If I called in sick again." Dr. Rodriguez's expression softened. "Have you told them about your condition?" "How can I? They've already decided I'm a liar or a drug addict. The diagnosis sounds made up even to me sometimes." The doctor sat down beside her bed. "Sarah, you have systemic lupus erythematosus. It's a serious autoimmune disease that can affect multiple organs, including your heart. Today's episode was likely caused by inflammation around your heart muscle. This isn't something you can push through or ignore anymore." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah had heard the diagnosis before, but somehow it felt more real here in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hospital room, with machines beeping around her and dripping medication into her arm. The fatigue, the joint pain, the brain fog, the skin rashes, these are all real symptoms of a real disease, Dr. Rodriguez continued. "You're not weak, and you're not making excuses. Your immune system is attacking your own body." Sarah's phone buzzed with text messages. Janet asking when she would be back at work. Mike joking about her performance at the restaurant. Lisa genuinely checking if she was okay, but also mentioning that everyone was talking about what had happened. I have to go back to work tomorrow, Sarah said. I can't afford to lose this job. You're not going anywhere tomorrow, Dr. Rodriguez said firmly. We need to adjust your medications and monitor your heart function. You'll be here for at least 3 days. 3 days. Sarah closed her eyes and imagined the conversation that would happen in the office tomorrow. The eye rolls when Janet announced she was in the hospital. The jokes about her timing, collapsing right during a team lunch. The speculation about what she was really doing. Doctor, she said quietly, when people ask what's wrong with me, what should I tell them? Tell them the truth. Lupus is nothing to be ashamed of. It's a legitimate medical condition that affects millions of people. But Sarah knew it wasn't that simple. The truth was complicated and invisible. Lupus didn't show up in obvious ways like a broken leg or cancer. It was a disease that hid behind normal-looking faces and caused symptoms that sounded vague and made up to people who had never experienced them. That night, as she lay in the hospital bed listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor, Sarah made a decision. She would tell them. When she got back to work, she would sit down with Janet and explain everything. The diagnosis, the medications, the reason for all those doctor appointments. Maybe they would understand. Maybe they would finally see that she hadn't been lying or making excuses. She had no way of knowing that her colleagues had already moved beyond speculation and settled on their own explanation for what had happened at the restaurant. By the time she returned to work, the story would be that Sarah Martinez had faked a medical emergency to get out of team lunch, and that her collapse had been nothing more than an attention-seeking performance. The truth about her condition would have to fight against months of assumptions and gossip. And sometimes the truth wasn't strong enough to win that battle. But for now, in the quiet of the hospital room with medication finally bringing her symptoms under control, Sarah allowed herself to hope that honesty might be enough to change everything. Sarah returned to work 5 days later with a folder full of medical documentation and a determination to finally set the record straight. Dr. Rodriguez had given her official paperwork detailing her lupus diagnosis, her medication schedule, and the accommodations she would need going forward. She also carried a letter explaining that her recent hospitalization had been due to lupus-related heart complications, not a panic attack or performance, as some had suggested. But the office atmosphere had shifted dramatically in her absence. When she walked in Monday morning, conversations stopped mid-sentence. People glanced at her sideways and whispered to each other behind computer monitors. The energy was different, colder, more suspicious than before. "Welcome back," Janet said curtly when Sarah approached her desk. "We need to talk. My office, 10 minutes. Sarah spent those 10 minutes organizing her medical papers and rehearsing what she would say. She would be honest, direct, and professional. She would explain everything clearly and provide all the documentation they needed. This was her chance to clear the air and start fresh. But when she sat down across from Janet's desk, she immediately sensed that her supervisor had already made up her mind about what had happened. So, Janet began, "Quite a performance at the restaurant last week." "Actually, I wanted to explain about that," Sarah said, pulling out her folder. "I have documentation from my doctor that explains." "Sarah, stop." Janet held up her hand. "I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen every trick in the book. Faking medical emergencies to get out of work obligations is a new low, even for you." Sarah felt her carefully planned speech crumble. "I didn't fake anything. I was hospitalized for 5 days. I have the discharge papers right here." Janet barely glanced at the papers Sarah offered. "Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but it needs to stop. The whole team is talking about how convenient it was that you suddenly had a medical emergency right when we were having celebration lunch." "It wasn't convenient at all," Sarah said, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "It was terrifying. Your heart was fine," Janet interrupted. "Tom called the hospital the next day to check on you. They said you were in stable condition and responding well to treatment. If it was such a serious emergency, why were you stable so quickly?" Sarah stared at her supervisor in disbelief. Because they gave me medication to control the inflammation. That's how lupus treatment works. The symptoms are serious, but they can be managed with proper lupus. Janet's eyebrows shot up. Now you have lupus? What happened to all those mysterious specialist appointments? What happened to never being able to give us a straight answer about your condition? I was trying to get a diagnosis, Sarah explained desperately. It took months of testing to figure out what was wrong. That's why I couldn't explain it before. I didn't know myself, but she could see in Janet's expression that nothing she said was going to change her supervisor's mind. The narrative had already been written, and Sarah's role in it was that of the manipulative employee who would go to any lengths to avoid responsibility. Here's what's going to happen, Janet said, leaning back at her chair. You're going to stop with the medical drama. You're going to come to work on time, every day, without excuses. And you're going to prove that you can be a reliable member of this team. No more mysterious appointments, no more calling in sick, and definitely no more theatrical collapses. But I have a chronic illness, Sarah protested. I'm going to need ongoing medical care. Dr. Rodriguez wants to see me every 2 weeks to monitor. Then you'll schedule those appointments outside of work hours, Janet said firmly. Or you'll find another job. I'm not running a charity here. Sarah, this is a business, and I need employees who can do their jobs without constant drama. Sarah left Janet's office feeling defeated and more alone than ever. The medical documentation sat unopened in her folder, her carefully prepared explanations unheard. She had naively believed that the truth would be enough, that once people understood what she was going through, they would show compassion and support. Instead, she found herself facing an impossible situation. Her lupus symptoms were unpredictable and often severe. Some days, she could barely get out of bed. Other days, she felt almost normal. The medications helped, but they came with their own side effects that sometimes made working difficult. Missing appointments with Dr. Rodriguez wasn't an option. Lupus required careful monitoring to prevent serious complications. But her workplace had made it clear that none of this mattered. In their eyes, she was a problem employee who needed to either shape up or ship out. Over the next few weeks, Sarah tried desperately to prove herself. She came to work early and stayed late, pushing through pain and fatigue that sometimes made her vision blur. She scheduled all her medical appointments for weekends or after hours, even when Dr. Rodriguez warned her that delay could be dangerous. The effort was unsustainable, and everyone around her could see it. She lost weight rapidly. Her skin took on a grayish pallor, and the butterfly-shaped rash across her cheeks, one of lupus's most recognizable symptoms, became more pronounced. But instead of generating concern, her deteriorating appearance only reinforced her colleagues' belief that she was struggling with substance abuse or mental health issues that she was too dishonest to address. She looks terrible, Lisa whispered to Mike one afternoon. Whatever she's really dealing with, it's getting worse. Maybe that's what happens when you lie so much you start believing your own stories, Mike replied with a shrug. Sarah overheard this conversation from her desk, and for the first time in months, she felt a flash of real anger. These people knew nothing about what she was going through, yet they felt qualified to judge her every move and dismiss her pain as fiction. She had tried honesty, and it had failed. She had tried documentation, and it was ignored. She had tried proving her dedication through sheer willpower, and it was slowly killing her. As she sat at her desk that afternoon, struggling to focus on spreadsheets while her joints screamed in protest, and her head pounded from the fluorescent lights, Sarah realized that something had to change. She couldn't keep living like this, caught between a disease that was attacking her body and a workplace that was attacking her credibility. But she had no idea that the decision would soon be taken out of her hands entirely. The end came on a Thursday morning in November. Sarah had been struggling more than usual. Her lupus was flaring badly, and the new medication Dr. Rodriguez had prescribed was causing severe nausea. She had made it to work on time, but by 10 a.m., she was fighting to stay upright at her desk. "You look like death warmed over," Tom commented as he passed by her desk. "Maybe you should go home and sleep off whatever you did last night." Sarah didn't bother responding. The assumption that her illness was somehow her own fault had become so routine that she barely noticed it anymore. She focused on her computer screen and tried to ignore the way her hand was shaking as she typed. At 11:30, Janet called an impromptu team meeting. "We have a major presentation tomorrow for the Peterson Group," she announced. "Everyone's going to need to stay late tonight to get ready. I know it's short notice, but this client is worth too much to mess up." Sarah's heart sank. She was supposed to start a new round of chemotherapy drugs that evening, a stronger treatment that Dr. Rodriguez had recommended to control her worsening symptoms. Missing the appointment would mean waiting another week, during which time her condition could deteriorate significantly. "Janet," she said quietly, "I have a medical appointment tonight that I absolutely cannot reschedule. Could I work on my part of the presentation from home this evening?" The room fell silent. Janet's expression hardened immediately. "Let me guess. Another mysterious emergency with your mysterious doctor?" "It's not mysterious," Sarah said, exhaustion making her voice flat. "I've explained this before. I have lupus, and I need regular treatment to— Oh, please." Mike let out a harsh laugh. "Lupus? Really? What's next? Chronic fatigue syndrome? Fibromyalgia? Are you just going to keep picking fashionable diseases until you find one that gets you sympathy?" The laughter that followed felt like physical blows. Even some of the newer employees who barely knew Sarah joined in, infected by the toxic atmosphere that had built up around her over the past months. "Enough," Janet said, but she was smiling. "Sarah, this is your final warning. Either you're here tonight working on this presentation, or you're not here at all anymore. I'm tired of accommodating your endless list of excuses." Sarah looked around the room at the faces of her colleagues. Some looked uncomfortable with the confrontation, but no one spoke up in her defense. These people had worked alongside her for 3 years, had shared lunches and birthday cakes and holiday parties with her, but not one of them was willing to consider that she might be telling the truth. "Fine," she said quietly, standing up from her chair. "I'll stay." But as she sat back down, a wave of dizziness hit her so hard that she had to grip her desk to keep from falling. The room spun, and she felt that familiar sharp pain in her chest that meant her heart was struggling again. "Drama queen," someone muttered from across the room. And that's when something inside Sarah finally snapped. "You want to see drama?" she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "You want to see what's really been wrong with me all this time?" Before anyone could stop her, Sarah pulled off the long-sleeve cardigan she always wore to work. Underneath, her arms were covered with the telltale, circular marks of repeated for insertions. But more shocking were the irregular, dark spots scattered across her forearms, the distinctive marks left by minor internal bleeding, a common side effect of the immunosuppressive drugs she had been taking. The room went dead silent. "These are from my 4 treatments," Sarah said, pointing to the needle marks. "Twice a week for the past 4 months. And these," she indicated the darker spots, "are from the medications that are keeping my immune system from killing me." She pulled up her sleeves further, revealing more marks, and then lifted her hair to show the patches where it had thinned from medication side effects. "This is what lupus looks like," she continued, her voice getting stronger with each word. "This is what I've been hiding from all of you because I was afraid you'd treat me differently. Turns out you treated me terribly anyway." The office was so quiet that the only sound was the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant traffic outside. "Sarah," Lisa whispered, "we didn't know." "I tried to tell you," Sarah replied. "I tried to explain. I brought documentation. I gave you my doctor's contact information. But you had already decided I was a liar, so nothing I said mattered." Janet looked genuinely shaken for the first time since Sarah had known her. "Why didn't you just show us this before?" Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "Show you my medical scars? Prove my illness by displaying my body like evidence in a court case? Would you ask someone with cancer to show you their surgical scars before you believe they were sick?" The truth was finally out, laid bare in the most literal way possible. But instead of feeling relieved, Sarah felt utterly empty. The damage had been done. Months of suspicion, mockery, and isolation couldn't be undone by a few minutes of uncomfortable silence. I'll have my resignation letter on your desk by tomorrow, Sarah said, pulling her cardigan back on. And Janet? The Peterson presentation is going to be a disaster without the Morrison data analysis that only I know how to run. Good luck explaining that to the client. She gathered her things and walked toward the door. Behind her, she could hear the first tentative attempts at conversation, people trying to process what they had just witnessed. Sarah, wait, Lisa called after her. We can work this out, now that we understand. Sarah turned back one last time. Understanding would have been listening when I tried to explain. Understanding would have been showing basic human compassion when I was clearly struggling. What you're offering now isn't understanding. It's guilt. She left the building and drove straight to Dr. Rodriguez's office, where she finally started the treatment she should have begun months earlier. As the four dripped medication into her scarred arm, she thought about the twisted irony of it all. Her colleagues had spent so much time looking for proof that she was lying, they had completely missed the very real evidence that she was sick. The marks on her arms had been there all along, hidden under long sleeves, but visible to anyone who had bothered to look with compassion instead of suspicion. Sometimes the truth was exactly what it appeared to be. Sometimes the person asking for help really did need help. And sometimes by the time people finally believed you, it was already too late for their belief to matter.